The silence was the first thing to break her, not the screaming of her crew as they were unwritten from the universe, not the silent, blossoming annihilation of the colony ship Odyssey, but the profound, absolute quiet inside the escape pod. For 3 days, Captain Eva Rostova had floated in the dead space where 10,000 souls had been. Her only companion, the rhythmic, indifferent hiss of the life support system. When the rescue crew from the patrol cutter Vigilance finally cut through the hatch, they found her strapped into her seat, her eyes wide open, staring at nothing. She wore the vacant expression of a woman who had gazed into the heart of a new and terrible god and found it utterly empty. They said she didn't blink for a full hour after they brought her aboard, her body rigid, her hands clenched so tightly her knuckles were the color of bone. The ship's medic tried to sedate her, but the captain of the Vigilance, a grizzled veteran named Jan, waved him off. He recognized the look in her eyes. It was the calm at the epicenter of a hurricane, a stillness so complete it could only be prelude to total destruction. He pulled up a simple metal stool, sat before her in the stark white medbay, and waited. When she finally spoke, her voice was a ruin, a dry rasp that scraped the air into words. They sang. She whispered, and the sound was so brittle, Gian feared it would shatter. There was no hailing frequency, no declaration of war, just light. It came from their ships, a shimmering, silent aurora that washed over the Odyssey. It wasn't like plasma or a kinetic strike. It was beautiful. A single tear carved a path through the grime on her cheek, but her expression never changed. I was on the bridge. I saw Chief Engineer Miles turn to say something, but the light touched him first. He didn't explode. He didn't burn. He just stopped. He became a silhouette of static, and then he was gone. The light passed through the ship, and everywhere it touched, people vanished. Their voices, their heat signatures, their very matter erased. The ship's AI, the repository, the gene banks from Earth, all of it, gone. 10,000 colonists, the entire future of the diaspora, silenced in a heartbeat. Jian's blood ran cold. He had seen war, seen ships cracked open to the void, and bodies flash frozen in the vacuum of space. But this was something else. This was not destruction. It was deletion. Who were they? Captain Rehe asked, his voice low and steady. Eva's gaze finally focused on him, and for the first time, he saw the fire banked deep within the ice. They are the Cathar, the glimmering host. Their broadcast wasn't audio. It was a wave of pure energy, a message imprinted directly onto our minds just before the end. It felt like dismissal, like a groundskeeper pulling a weed. They called us chaotic resonance, a biological discordance that needed to be harmonized. They weren't angry. They weren't hateful. They were simply cleaning. The word hung in the sterile air, more obscene than any curse. Cleaning. That is what humanity had become to this new power in the void, a mess to be tidied. Gian knew what he had to do. The human diaspora was a fragile thing. 100 scattered fleets and habitats, forever squabbling over resources and ideologies, united only by the shared memory of a dead Earth. They had survived for centuries by being quiet, by staying in the dark spaces between the great empires, by never drawing attention. The attack on the Odyssey was proof that this strategy had failed. Quiet was no longer safety. It was an invitation. He ordered Eva Rostova's testimony recorded and broadcast on a priority channel, an encrypted, wide-beam signal sent to every known human settlement, from the mining guilds of the Titan Belt to the nomadic flotillas of the Outer Rim. The message spread like a virus through the fractured consciousness of humanity. On the factory station Hephaestus, the clang of machinery fell silent as thousands of workers watched the hollow-faced captain describe the erasure of their brethren. In the agricultural domes of New Eden, farmers lowered their tools, the faces of the lost colonist friends, family, loved ones swimming before their eyes. In the command centers of the various defense fleets, grizzled admirals who had spent their lives advocating for caution and de-escalation felt a cold, unfamiliar rage stir in their chests. For centuries, they had told their people that humanity's strength was its resilience, its ability to endure. But Ava's testimony posed a terrifying question. How do you endure annihilation? How do you resist an enemy that doesn't want to conquer you, but simply wants you to not exist? An emergency council was convened. A frantic, chaotic affair conducted over the lag of interstellar communication. Voices from dozens of factions clashed in a cacophony of fear and fury. Some argued for a full retreat, to pull all of humanity into a single, heavily fortified system and hide. Others, the pragmatists, spoke of pleading their case to the other galactic powers, of seeking arbitration or protection. They were refugees, they argued, not warriors. They lacked the industrial base, the unified command, the sheer numbers to wage war against an enemy like the Cathar. The debate raged for 2 days, a storm of indecision that threatened to tear the diaspora apart. It was Eva who ended it. Patched into the council feed from the Bridge of the Vigilance, she appeared on their screens not as a victim, but as an oracle. She had shed her grime-caked uniform for the simple gray fatigues of the patrol service. Her face was scrubbed clean, and her hair was pulled back severely. The emptiness in her eyes had been replaced by a chilling, unwavering certainty. She listened without comment as the leaders debated, her silence a judgment on them all. When the moderator finally gave her the floor, she did not speak of grief or loss. She spoke of physics. The Cathar perceive us as chaotic resonance, she began, her voice as flat and hard as a sheet of steel. To them, we are noise. For 500 years, the diaspora's guiding principle has been to be a quieter noise. We hide, we run, we negotiate from a position of weakness, hoping the louder sounds of the galaxy will mask our presence. The destruction of the Odyssey is the result of that philosophy. The Cathar did not attack us because they perceived us as a threat. They erased us because they did not perceive us at all. We were just static in their path. She leaned closer to the pic capture, and every leader in every corner of human space felt as if she were staring directly into their soul. You speak of hiding. You debate begging for help. You do not understand. There is no negotiating with a force that considers your existence a flaw in the universe. There is no reasoning with a storm. You cannot appeal to a fire. You either flee it, or you become a bigger fire. Her voice dropped to a near whisper, yet it carried with more force than any shout. We have tried being quiet. The result was 10,000 ghosts and the loss of our future. There is only one path left to us now. We must become the loudest noise in the galaxy. We must become a resonance so violent, so deafening, and so utterly chaotic that we can never be dismissed as mere static again. We must burn so brightly that our light is seared into their memory forever. This cannot be a war of containment or survival. It must be a war of proclamation. The proclamation that we are here, that our chaos is the price of our existence, and that we will render this entire sector of space uninhabitable before we allow ourselves to be harmonized into silence. She paused, her eyes sweeping across the stunned faces on the council feed. I am not asking you to authorize a military strike. I am asking you to unleash a plague, to sanction a fury so absolute that the Cathar, and any who watch from the sidelines, will learn that the cost of silencing one human voice is the roar of 1 billion screaming in reply. No more hiding. No more apologies for our existence. From this day forward, our policy is simple. We will be heard. In the silence that followed, a new consensus was born, forged not in debate, but in the cold fire of Eva Rustova's words. The old protocols were dead. The era of the quiet refugee was over. Across the diaspora, the scattered fleets of humanity began to move, converging not for defense, but for an attack so savage it would reshape the very definition of war. The diaspora answered Ava's call not with a single, unified voice, but with 1,000 dissonant screams converging into a chorus of rage. From the black, airless canyons of the asteroid belt came the Miners' Guild, their hulking rock haulers and ore processors retrofitted with seismic charges and kinetic drivers. Ugly, brutal ships designed to crack planets, now aimed at the heart of an empire. From the swirling nebulae of the outer rim emerged the nomad fleets, their generation ships great, slow-moving arcologies that had not seen a planet in centuries, bristling with newly installed point defense cannons and missile pods jury-rigged onto their observation decks. They were a fleet of ghosts, a flotilla of the forgotten, their hulls scarred by micrometeoroids and time. Their crews a mix of hardened spacers and civilians who had never held a weapon but now drilled with grim determination in the hydroponic bays and repurposed cargo holds. They gathered at a designated dead system, a graveyard of a long-dead star, its faint, ghostly light illuminating the strangest and most terrifying armada humanity had ever assembled. There were sleek patrol cutters floating alongside clumsy interstellar freighters, whose cargo bays now housed squadrons of hastily armed strike craft. There were scientific survey vessels, their sensor arrays recalibrated to target enemy energy signatures, and luxury starliners, their opulent cabins now serving as barracks for Marines. This was not a navy, it was an uprising. It was the collected wrath of a species pushed beyond the edge of endurance, and at its heart, aboard the unassuming patrol cutter Vigilance, was the woman who had become their unwilling prophet. Captain Eva Rostova watched the fleet assemble from her bridge, her face reflected in the armored glass, a pale specter superimposed over a sea of vengeful steel. She had not asked for this role. She had only spoken the truth of her own desolation, and in doing so, had given voice to the soul of her people. But a soul, however righteous in its fury, could not aim a cannon or plot a jump vector. For that, they needed a monster. His name was Kalen Vance, a name spoken only in whispers in the halls of the old Diaspora Command. A relic from a time when humanity had been more wolf than sheep. He was a grand admiral of a fleet that no longer existed, put into forced retirement 3 decades prior for advocating a preemptive war against the encroaching Cygnian hegemony. His doctrine of total engagement, a philosophy that called for the complete and utter annihilation of any potential threat's capacity to wage war, including its industrial and civilian infrastructure, was deemed barbaric, a shameful throwback to the primitive conflicts of old Earth. They had called him a butcher, a warmonger, a madman. Now they called him back. A sleek diplomatic courier retrieved him from his exile on a barren moon, where he had spent 30 years tending a rock garden and studying the ancient texts of forgotten warlords. He stepped aboard the Vigilance looking more like a withered scholar than a soldier, his face a road map of scars, his eyes possessing a weary, ancient intelligence. He listened to the recording of Eva's testimony without a word, his expression unreadable. When it was finished, he looked at Ava, who stood waiting for him on the bridge, and for the first time in years, the old wolf inside him stirred. "They called your plan a plague. Captain," he said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "They are wrong. A plague is indiscriminate. What you propose, what this moment demands, is surgery, a vivisection. We will not simply be a loud noise. We will be a targeted, agonizing scream. We will find what the Cathar value, what they consider sacred, what defines their harmony, and we will tear it from them, piece by agonizing piece. We will turn their own philosophy into a weapon against them." This was the birth of the doctrine of cacophony. In the central command hub of the newly christened Fury Fleet, Admiral Vance laid out his strategy, and it was more terrifying than anyone had imagined. He did not speak of ship-to-ship combat or fleet maneuvers. He spoke of resonance weapons. "The Cathar erased our people with a wave of harmonizing energy," Vance explained, his hands gesturing at a holographic schematic of a Cathar vessel. "They are a species that operates on a level of quantum coherence we cannot match. To fight their fire with our fire is suicide. We will fight it with noise." He brought up another file, this one a chaotic swirl of data. This is the complete works of Beethoven, overlaid with the final distress calls of 100 lost ships, the laughter of the children on the Odyssey taken from its logs, and the raw, unstructured thought patterns of a human in the throes of a nightmare. It is data, but it is also chaos. It is everything they are not. Our first strike will not be a torpedo. It will be this. We will use their own energy transmission methods to broadcast this cacophony bomb directly into their networked consciousness. We will give them a glimpse of the beautiful, terrible, illogical madness that is humanity. But his plan went further. He ordered the mining ships retrofitted not just with weapons, but with their original equipment. He planned to crack open asteroids, not for ore, but to create dense, unpredictable fields of high-velocity debris in key Cathar shipping lanes. He ordered the agricultural Orcs to begin cultivating weaponized plagues, biological agents designed not to kill the Cathar, but to introduce chaotic, unpredictable mutations into the perfectly harmonized ecosystems of their worlds. He turned every aspect of human civilization into a potential weapon. Art, biology, industry, faith, all were now munitions in the war to be heard. The fleet transformed under his command. The chaotic assembly of ships became a cohesive, if unconventional, weapon. Engineers, guided by Vance's rediscovered tactical archives, worked feverishly, turning civilian vessels into instruments of his new doctrine. They mounted massive signal amplifiers onto communication relays, creating the first scream cannons. They converted hydroponic bays into biowarfare labs. In the cargo holds, Marines practiced fighting not just with pulse rifles, but with industrial tools, plasma cutters, sonic drills, demolition charges preparing for brutal, Close quarters boarding actions designed not to capture ships, but to disable them and leave them as silent, dead monuments in the void. And, through it all, Eva Rostova walked the decks. She was not a commander, not in the way Vance was. She was a living reminder. She ate with the engineers in the greasy mess halls. She stood vigil with the sentries on the outer hull. She listened to the stories of the families who had lost everything. She did not offer them hope of a safe return or promises of a swift victory. She offered them only a shared purpose. "They tried to make us quiet," she would say, her voice never rising above a steady, determined murmur. "They believed our song was discordant. When we are done, the silence they craved will be the most terrifying sound in the universe, for it will be the silence of their own extinction. Every shot we fire is a note in a new anthem. Let it be a symphony of retribution." The target for this symphony was chosen with surgical precision, not a military fortress or a major shipyard, but a small, seemingly insignificant world on the edge of Cathar space, named Xylos. It was what the Cathar called a sanctuary world, a planet whose ecosystem had been perfectly harmonized by their terraforming technology. It was a place of pristine, crystalline forests, placid, glassy oceans, and skies filled with geometric flocks of native birds that flew in perfect, silent formations. To the Cathar, Xylos was a work of art, a testament to their philosophy of bringing order to the chaos of the natural universe. At its heart was a towering, crystalline spire known as the Resonance Temple, a structure that broadcast a low-level harmonic frequency across the entire planet, maintaining its unnatural, perfect equilibrium. To Admiral Vance, it was the perfect target. To attack their fleets is to attack their body. He told his commanders, "We will attack their soul." The Fury fleet made the jump into the Xylos system in absolute, terrifying silence. They did not announce their presence. They did not charge their weapons. They simply appeared, a horde of mismatched, ugly ships, a discordant stain against the perfect backdrop of the Cathar sanctuary. A single Cathar patrol vessel, a sleek, silver craft shaped like a musical note, moved to intercept them, its energy signature pulsing with what felt like confused inquiry rather than alarm. It did not get the chance to hail them. From the lead vessel, the Vigilance, a wave of energy, invisible and silent, lanced out. It was not a weapon of destruction, but of infection. It was the data scream, the chaos bomb, the concentrated essence of human noise. On the bridge of the Cathar patrol ship, the serene, harmonized minds of its crew were assaulted by a hurricane of alien sensation. They felt the rage of Achilles, the sorrow of a forgotten folk song, the dizzying, illogical genius of a quantum physics equation, the terror of a child in the dark, and the final, agonized screams of the 10,000 souls aboard the Odyssey. The ship's systems, designed for perfect order, convulsed. Its crystalline hull flickered, lost its coherence, and then, without a sound, dissolved into a cloud of shimmering dust. The war of noise had begun, and humanity's first shot was a scream that could break minds. The void where the Cathar patrol ship had been was unnervingly clean. There was no debris, no radiation bloom, no lingering echo of a dying machine, just a fading shimmer, like heat haze off a summer road. Aboard the Vigilance, a profound silence held the bridge. The crew, hardened spacers and veterans of 100 skirmishes, stared at their screens. their faces a mixture of awe and horror. They had just witnessed a weapon that did not kill, but unmade. Admiral Vance broke the stillness, his voice a dry rasp. "Report." The sensor officer, a young woman with a shock of crimson hair, swallowed hard. "Sir, no Cathar energy signatures remaining. The vessel is gone, but the planet is responding." On the main view screen, the serene beauty of Xylos was marred by a new phenomenon, a ripple of light, a wave of pure, silver energy was emanating from the resonance temple, expanding outwards like a silent shockwave. "It is a counter-frequency," Vance murmured, a flicker of academic curiosity in his tired eyes. "They are attempting to harmonize us, to calm the storm. They think we are a malfunction." The silver wave washed over the Fury fleet, and for a moment, the lights on the bridge flickered. The hum of the life support system wavered, threatening to resolve into a single, perfect tone. A few crew members grunted, clutching their heads as a feeling of profound, unnatural peace tried to settle over their minds. But the feeling passed as quickly as it came. The chaotic, inefficient, gloriously messy biology and technology of the human ships had no single frequency to lock onto. The wave passed through them, finding nothing to harmonize. Like a perfect key searching for a lock in a solid wall, the Cathar's attempt to fix them had failed. "Their art has failed them, Admiral," Ava said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Now, show them ours." Vance nodded, his lips tightening into a grim line. "Signal the guild. Phase 2. Across the fleet, the monolithic mining vessels, ugly and powerful, moved into position. Their forward sections split open, not to reveal missile tubes or energy projectors, but massive magnetic accelerators and gravitic launchers, the tools of their trade. They locked onto the moonlets and asteroid clusters that orbited Xylos in a mathematically perfect dance. Then they broke the music. With shuddering force, the accelerators fired, not with projectiles, but with raw kinetic energy. They nudged the orbits of a dozen massive rocks, pushing them out of their pristine alignment and sending them on a slow, deliberate, and unstoppable collision course with the planet below. It was a brutal, artless act of celestial vandalism. The Cathar response was immediate and elegant. A network of defense platforms, previously invisible against the black, activated around the planet. They fired beams of focused energy that did not explode the asteroids, but gently, precisely, began to push them back, attempting to correct their trajectories. "Predictable," Vance grunted. "They are trying to restore order. They will not destroy the asteroids, for that would create more chaos debris, dust, an unpredictable variable. They will try to guide them." He turned to the communications officer. "Signal the nomads. Unleash the ghosts." From the bellies of the nomad generation ships, a new wave of weapons launched. They were not missiles, but thousands of simple metal canisters, each containing a low-power, short-range engine and a single crude sensor. They were ghosts, designed to mimic the heat and energy signature of a human strike craft. They swarmed towards the Cathar defense platforms, a chaotic cloud of false targets. The platform's automated systems, designed for the elegant simplicity of orbital mechanics, were overwhelmed. Their targeting beams flickered wildly, trying to track thousands of erratic, nonsensical threats at once. It was a denial-of-service attack on a planetary scale. While the platforms were distracted, the first of the asteroids struck. It wasn't an extinction-level event, but a series of precise, devastating blows. One massive rock slammed into the planetary ring system, shattering the perfect band of ice and dust into a treacherous, chaotic minefield. Others struck the poles, cracking the ice caps and sending continent-sized shelves of ice calving into the placid oceans, triggering tsunamis of a scale the harmonized world had never known. The Cathar had tried to gently nudge the falling rocks. Humanity had simply thrown more rocks. "The physical chaos is sown," Ava said, her eyes fixed on the scarred image of Xylos. "Now, the biological." She looked at Vance, her expression a mask of cold resolve. "Authorize Phase 3. This was the Rubicon. It was one thing to throw rocks and data screams. It was another to poison a world." Vance met her gaze, held it for a long moment, and then gave a single, curt nod to his comms officer. The order was relayed to the agricultural Arcs, the ships that held the last vestiges of Earth's once vibrant biosphere. From their science labs, they launched specially designed torpedoes that did not explode, but burst high in the atmosphere, releasing their payload. It was a cocktail of genetically engineered chaos, a hyper-aggressive fungal spore that could grow on the Cathar's crystalline plant life, a viral phage that targeted the bacteria responsible for maintaining the planet's perfect atmospheric balance, and a swarm of microscopic, self-replicating nanites programmed with one simple instruction: introduce random error into any DNA they encountered. The effect was not immediate, but it was insidious. Within hours, the pristine world began to rot from the inside out. The crystalline forests began to weep a viscous, black sap, their perfect geometric structures slumping and deforming. The glassy oceans bloomed with vast, sickly green algae blooms that choked out the native life. Vines grew thorns of jagged obsidian, and flowers bloomed with petals that resembled screaming mouths. The Cathar's art was being vandalized by the most chaotic force of all uncontrolled, cancerous life. With the planet's defenses shattered and its ecosystem collapsing into a nightmare of biological anarchy, the final phase began. "Ground assault," Vance commanded. "The temple. Leave nothing." Dropships, ugly, armored boxes of rage, plunged through the now turbulent atmosphere. They landed in the shadow of the Great Resonance Temple, a spire of living crystal that still pulsed with a faint, wounded light. The doors slammed down, and human Marines charged out, their heavy, scarred armor a brutalist intrusion into the serene landscape. The Cathar defenders were not soldiers. They were guardians, priests, tenders of the sacred harmony. They wore flowing silver robes and carried crystalline staves that emitted focused sonic pulses, designed to incapacitate, not kill. They were met with pulse rifle fire, plasma grenades, and the guttural war cries of men and women who had watched their families turn to static. The battle was a massacre. The Marines moved through the temple's serene courtyards and echoing halls like a virus, their muddy boots trampling the manicured moss gardens, their weapons leaving scorch marks on the flawless crystal walls. The Cathar guardians fought with a desperate, bewildered grace, their sonic weapons bouncing off the Marines' heavy armor, while return fire tore through their unarmored bodies. In the central chamber, at the base of the spire, the lead Marine, a grizzled sergeant named Harker, planted a massive demolition charge. He looked up at the shimmering, miles-high structure, the source of this world's soul. For the Odyssey, he growled, and armed the detonator. Aboard the Vigilance, Ava watched the live feed from Harker's helmet. She saw the serene, dying beauty of the temple, the bodies of the Cathar guardians, the determined face of the sergeant. The comms channel opened. Charge is set. Captain, awaiting your command. This was her moment. This was the culmination of her promise. She was no longer a victim in an escape pod. She was the hand that held the hammer, poised to shatter a work of art. Her voice, when it came, was clear, steady, and devoid of all emotion. Make them hear it. The command was relayed. On Xylos, Sergeant Harker triggered the detonator. The base of the Resonance Temple erupted in a flash of white-hot fire. For a moment, the entire spire glowed with a blinding intensity. And then, with a silent, agonizing slowness, it began to crack. A deep, resonant groan, the first true sound the planet had made in centuries, echoed across the land as the crystal fractured. The spire did not explode. It shattered, collapsing in on itself in a slow-motion avalanche of 1 billion crystalline shards. As the temple died, the harmonic frequency it had broadcast for centuries died with it. The effect was catastrophic. The planet, released from its enforced harmony, convulsed. The mutated flora and fauna, no longer suppressed, burst forth in a riot of grotesque growth. The ground itself shuddered, great tectonic plates shifting as the planet's own chaotic nature, long held in check, reasserted itself with volcanic fury. Xylos, the sanctuary, the symbol of Cathar perfection, was now a monument to human rage, a screaming, dying world, forever scarred, forever discordant, on the bridge of the Vigilance. Ava Rostova watched the world break. They had done it. They had made themselves heard. They had attacked the Caesar's soul. And now, for the first time in their timeless existence, that soul knew the chaotic, human sensation of true hatred. The victory at Xylos was a hollow thing. There were no cheers on the bridge of the Vigilance, no triumphant celebrations in the mess halls of the Fury Fleet. There was only the grim, metallic taste of ash and the silent, accusing stare of a dead world. They had won. They had made the Cathar feel, but in doing so, they had carved a piece of their own humanity out and left it to rot in the poisoned soil of that sanctuary. The fleet limped back to the dead star system that served as their staging ground. A flotilla of wounded, exhausted predators. Hulls were patched. Ammunition was restocked. And the dead were counted in quiet. Somber ceremonies held in the echoing void. A heavy silence settled over the crews. The adrenaline of battle replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. They had kicked the hornet's nest. Now, they waited for the swarm. The Cathar's response came a week later. It was not a fleet. It was not a weapon. It was a message, the first direct communication humanity had ever received from them. The transmission came on all frequencies, overriding every human comms system simultaneously. There was no image, only a voice. It was not a single voice, but a chorus of 1,000 voices speaking in perfect, chilling unison, a sound that was both beautiful and utterly devoid of life. It spoke a flawless, unaccented dialect of diaspora standard. "We perceive you now," the chorus began, its tone as calm and detached as a physician diagnosing a terminal illness. "Your existence is not mere static. It is a corruption, a chaotic malignancy in the resonance of the cosmos. Your attack on the sanctuary was not an act of war. It was the spasm of a diseased organism. We held you in dismissal. We were in error. A corruption cannot be ignored. It must be excised. We have created a cure for you. We are coming to administer it." The message ended. It did not repeat. There was no room for negotiation, no threat, no ultimatum. It was a statement of clinical, absolute fact. Humanity was a cancer, and the Cathar were the surgeons. Admiral Vance played the recording over and over in his war room, his face etched with a new kind of concern. "This is not the language of an artist," he said to Eva, who stood beside him, watching the silent stars. "This is the language of an exterminator. They are no longer trying to harmonize us. They are preparing to sterilize us." The mood in the fleet shifted from grim satisfaction to a cold, creeping dread. The faceless, dismissive enemy was gone. In its place was something far more terrifying, an enemy with a purpose, an enemy that now saw them clearly and had judged them unworthy of existence. Under Vance's relentless command, the Fury fleet prepared for the coming storm. They scavenged the wreckage of their previous battles, cannibalizing parts to bring their most heavily damaged ships back online. The Scream cannons were refined, their chaotic data streams made more potent, more virulent. The Marines drilled until they dropped from exhaustion, their mock battles turning into bloody, bare-knuckle brawls fueled by fear and rage. They were no longer an insurgency. They were the last line of defense for a species on the verge of erasure. Their chance to test their resolve came sooner than expected. Scouts reported a Cathar fleet massing in the Tycho Abyss, a sector of space known for its gravitational anomalies and sensor-ghosting nebulae. It was a small fleet, but its composition was unlike anything they had seen before. The sleek, elegant, silver ships were gone. These were different. They were stark, black, and angular, built without a single curve, their hulls seemingly absorbing the light around them. They were not things of beauty. They were instruments of pure, joyless function. Vance, true to his doctrine, chose to meet them head-on. "We will not wait for the scalpel to come to us," he declared. "We will shove our fist down the surgeon's throat." The Fury fleet jumped into the Tycho Abyss, emerging from the swirling mists of the nebula to face the new Cathar armada. The black ships waited in a perfect, silent formation, their engines emitting no visible light, their hulls betraying no energy signatures. They felt less like ships and more like holes in the fabric of space. The battle began as the last one had, with a human scream. The Scream cannons fired, bathing the Cathar Purifier fleet in a wave of concentrated human chaos. But this time, something was different. The black hulls shimmered, not with damage, but with a faint, violet aura. The data scream, the weapon that had broken minds and dissolved a ship, was absorbed, neutralized, and dissipated without effect. The purifiers had been inoculated against the noise. Then they returned fire. It was not a lance of light or a plasma torpedo. It was a wave of nothing. A ripple of profound silence expanded from the Cathar fleet. A wave of absolute nullity. Aboard the Vigilance, the bridge crew felt it first. The sensor officer blinked, shaking her head as if to clear it. "Sir, I've lost the target locks." The helmsman grunted, his hands tightening on the controls. "My navigation is fuzzy. I can't recall the vector." On the comms, voices became hesitant, filled with static and confusion. "Warhound to Fury Actual, We were supposed to, what were the orders across the human fleet? The same phenomenon was spreading. It was not an attack on their ships, but on their minds. It was a weapon of anti-thought. The hymn of nullity, the Cathar's cure, was not designed to kill them, but to make them forget how to live. It smoothed over the sharp edges of memory, cooled the fire of rage into a dull, listless apathy. It didn't erase minds. It simply made them quiet. Ava felt it like a physical blow. The burning, vivid memory of the Odyssey, the silent light, the disappearing crew, the faces of the lost began to feel distant, like a story she had read in a book. The rage that had been her constant companion for months felt childish, unnecessary. The purpose that had driven her, that had forged this fleet, seemed to evaporate, leaving behind a hollow, tired emptiness. Why were they fighting? She couldn't quite remember. She looked over at Vance. The old admiral's face was pale, a bead of sweat tracing a path through the scars on his temple. He was gripping the edge of his command console, his knuckles white, his eyes darting around the bridge as if trying to solve an equation whose variables kept disappearing. He was a master of tactics. But this was not a problem that could be outmaneuvered. How do you fight an enemy that makes you forget you are at war? The Fury fleet was faltering. Ships drifted aimlessly, their guns falling silent. Boarding crews stood frozen in their launch bays. The purpose of their mission, a vague, fading echo. The Cathar purifiers began to advance, their black, silent forms moving with the inexorable patience of a rising tide, ready to wash away the last vestiges of human resistance. It was Eva who broke the spell. Deep within the encroaching silence, one memory refused to be smoothed over. It was the memory of the children's laughter from the Odyssey's logs, the sound Vance had woven into his first chaos bomb. It was a sound of pure, illogical, beautiful chaos. It was the antithesis of the hymn of nullity. It was everything they were fighting to preserve. No, she whispered, the word a small, defiant spark in the suffocating quiet. She stumbled to the communications console, pushing the stunned officer aside. Her hands flew across the controls, her mind fighting through the fog of apathy. She was not a tactician. She was not a soldier. But she was a survivor. She knew the shape of her own grief, the texture of her own rage. "What are you doing?" Vance managed to rasp, his voice strained. "Fighting noise with noise," she replied, her fingers keying in a final command sequence. She wasn't targeting the Cathar. She was targeting her own fleet. She isolated the raw, unfiltered recording of her own testimony, the broken words, the choked sobs, the sheer, undiluted agony of her survival, and prepared to broadcast it. It was a desperate, terrible gamble. To save them from the empty peace of the Cathar, she would have to drown them in her own pain. "Override all shipboard comms," she commanded the ship's AI. "Maximum amplification. Let them hear it. Let them all remember." She slammed her palm down on the activation panel, and across the entire Fury fleet, from the bridge of the largest carrier to the engine room of the smallest frigate. A single, broken voice began to speak, screaming into the silence. The silence on the bridge of the Vigilance shattered first. It was not replaced by the clean data of the comms, but by a sound raw and broken, a voice torn from the throat of a ghost. It was Eva's voice, captured in the moments after her rescue, a testament of pure, unadulterated grief. It filled the airwaves, a cacophony of pain that was the antithesis of the Cathar's empty peace. on the helm. The pilot, who had been staring blankly at his console, suddenly convulsed, his hands flying to his helmet as if to block out the sound. But the sound was already inside him. He saw it then, not as a distant story, but as a visceral memory, the shimmering light, the silent erasure, the faces of 10,000 ghosts. The placid emptiness in his mind was scoured away by a tidal wave of remembered fury. His knuckles turned white on the controls, and a single, guttural sob of rage escaped his lips. Across the fleet, the same violent awakening was taking place. In engine rooms, crews who had been standing listlessly by their silent cores were jolted back to life, the memory of their purpose crashing down on them. On the gunnery decks, men and women collapsed to their knees, weeping not from sadness, but from the sheer or overwhelming return of their hatred. The hymn of nullity was a weapon of forgetting, but Eva had unleashed a weapon of perfect, terrible remembrance. The fleet shuddered back to life, its engines roaring not with the hum of machinery, but with the collective scream of a species that had been forced to look into its own grave. Admiral Vance was thrown back against his command console, the raw emotion of Eva's broadcast hitting him like a physical force. The fog in his mind burned away, leaving behind the stark, cold clarity of the battlefield. He saw the Cathar purifiers, their silent advance momentarily halted, as if they were confused by the sudden resurgence of noise from their sedated patient. He saw his own fleet, battered and reeling, but with fire in its eyes once more. The rage was back. The chaos was back. And in that chaos, Vance saw his final terrible opportunity. "Ava!" He barked, his voice raw but steady. "Keep broadcasting. Link your signal to the scream cannons. I don't want a data bomb of mixed signals. I want only that, only the pain. Focus it." He turned to the tactical map, his mind racing, connecting variables with the speed of a master strategist. The Cathar had adapted to their noise, creating an antidote. The purifiers were the delivery system for that antidote, and their hymn of nullity was still being broadcast, a smothering blanket of psychic silence. They built a cure. Vance snarled, a feral grin touching his lips for the first time. They created a dam to hold back our chaos. But every dam has a cornerstone, and if you break it, the flood doesn't just return. It returns with the full, catastrophic pressure of everything it was holding back. He pointed a trembling, scarred finger at the center of the Cathar formation. One ship was different from the others. It was larger, its black, angular hull even more absolute, a perfect void against the stars. It was from this vessel that the nullity wave felt the strongest. It was the source. "That is their master switch," Vance declared. "The central processing unit for their cure. We are not going to fight their fleet. We are going to perform a lobotomy." The plan was suicide, and every soul in the fleet knew it. It was a straight, desperate charge through the heart of the Cathar formation, a single, all-or-nothing strike at the command vessel. There would be no tactics, no elegant maneuvers. There would only be a spear of human fury, aimed at the enemy's heart. "The Miners' Guild will lead," Vance commanded, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "Full burn. Use your gravitic launchers to pull their outer ships into each other. Create a corridor of chaos. The nomads will follow. Release every ghost, every piece of debris, every last canister of biological plague you have left. Blind them, choke them, give them 1,000 things to correct. The rest of the fleet, you are the shield. You will form a moving wall around the vigilance. Your only objective is to get her to the target, no matter the cost." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the bridge, meeting the eyes of every officer. "This is not an order to win. This is an order to endure, just long enough." As the fleet realigned, forming a brutal, ugly arrowhead, Vance turned to Ava. "Captain," he said, his voice softer now, "they built a weapon to silence us. You are about to turn it into a feedback loop. When you get close enough, I want you to direct the full power of your broadcast, your testimony, your grief, your rage directly into their nullity projector. We are going to force-feed their cure so much of the disease that it chokes to death on the irony." Eva met his gaze, her own eyes burning with a cold, clear light. The pain of her memory was no longer just her own. It was the fuel for the entire fleet. She had become the living soul of their war. "I, Admiral," she said simply. The charge of the Fury fleet was not a glorious sight. It was a convulsion of violence. The massive mining ships at the tip of the spear plowed into the Cathar lines, their gravitic beams wrenching the precise geometric formations into a tangled mess of colliding hulls. Nomad ships unleashed clouds of metallic chaff and biological horrors, creating a screen of pure chaos that blinded Cathar sensors. The main body of the fleet formed a cocoon of fire around the Vigilance, absorbing the full, terrible power of the Purifier's weapons. Ships exploded, their reactors breaching in silent, brilliant flashes. The Warhound, with Captain Anders at the helm, took a direct hit, its engines failing. Instead of retreating, Anders rammed his dying ship into the side of a Purifier cruiser, his final transmission a single, defiant curse. The cost was staggering, but for every human ship that died, the Vigilance moved another 1,000 kilometers closer to its target. On her bridge, Eva watched the sacrifice of her fleet, her face a mask of stone. She stood at the comm station, her hand on the broadcast amplifier, her voice a steady stream of channeled agony pouring into the fleet's cannons. She was no longer just broadcasting a memory. She was living it, over and over, turning her own personal hell into a weapon of galactic significance. Finally, they broke through. The path was clear. Before them loomed the Cathar command ship, a silent monolith of absolute black. "It's all yours, Captain." Vance's voice crackled over the comms, heavy with static and the whine of failing systems on his own ship. "Make it count. Vance out." Ava knew she would never hear his voice again. The old wolf had unleashed his final storm and was now content to be consumed by it. She looked at her crew, their faces streaked with sweat and tears, their eyes fixed on her, waiting. She was their prophet, their weapon, their reason. She gave the final order. "Fire!" It was not a beam of light or a torpedo that shot from the Vigilance. It was a wave of pure, weaponized sorrow, Eva's amplified grief, the concentrated essence of human loss, slammed into the Cathar command ship's nullity field. For a moment, nothing happened. The black ship simply absorbed it. Then, it began to shudder. The Cathar weapon, designed to create a perfect, empty piece, was being fed an unsolvable problem, a pain so absolute it could not be harmonized, a chaos so profound it could not be ordered. The nullity field flickered, and for the first time, a sound emerged from the Cathar vessel, a low, discordant hum, like 1,000 perfect voices, all screaming a different note. The feedback loop was catastrophic. The command ship was trying to silence a memory that was now being broadcast with the force of the supernova, and its own systems were tearing themselves apart in the attempt. The black hull began to crack, not with explosive force, but with lines of pure, violet light, the raw energy of the nullity field turning inwards. The ship did not explode. It folded in on itself, collapsing into a single, blinding point of light as the cure and the disease annihilated each other in a paradox of existential agony. With its destruction, the hymn of nullity died. Across the battlefield, the remaining purifier ships went inert, their engines dimming, their weapon ports closing. They drifted aimlessly, their guiding consciousness shattered, their perfect, collective mind broken by a single human memory. The battle was over. Humanity had survived. Months later, Captain Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of a new flagship, the Retribution. The Fury fleet was no more. In its place was the Grand Fleet of the human ascendancy. The war had changed them. They were no longer scattered refugees. They were a unified, galactic power, forged in the fires of their own rage. Below her, a newly colonized world, rich and green, turned slowly. Emissaries from a dozen different species had come to them in the preceding weeks, offering treaties, alliances, and tribute, their words laced with a deep and abiding fear. Humanity was no longer dismissed as static. They were the storm. Ava looked out at the star chart, at the vast, now quiet expanse of the galaxy. They had won. They had earned their place. But the silence that surrounded them now was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a universe holding its breath, waiting to see what the loudest noise would do next. The silence was the price of being heard, and Ava knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that her people would have to bear its weight forever.